Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099, and I am here to review a graphic novel that I read somewhat recently, X-Men: The New Age of Apocalypse. Recently, actually, it took me about half a year, but I reviewed all of the really big, epic Age of Apocalypse collections. There were 4 of them, I think, 4 or 5, and I reviewed those, and for the most part, I really enjoyed that event. A lot of it I felt like was kind of overblown, if you will. There was more of it than there really needed to be for the story that we were gotten. Wow, I just completely made up a way to say that. For the story that we got, there was more than what we really needed, but for the most part, I really enjoyed that story. And I have been trying to get this book for a little while now because I like the Age of Apocalypse and I like X-Men and I try to get all the X-Men stuff that I can. And I had heard that this was kind of a disappointment, but I really didn't know what to expect. I went in optimistic, even though I had heard that it wasn't the best story in the world, and I feel like I came away from it still kind of disappointed, and that is a shame because I like Chris Bachalo. I like Chris Bachalo a lot most of the time. In this book, I feel like there are times when he is just kind of drawing stuff and I can't really tell what's going on. There are some times where I get the feeling that I am supposed to know which character he is drawing, but the way he has positioned the characters on the page, I have a hard time telling what's going on or which character this is that's talking, stuff like that. There's one scene near the beginning of the story where Puck is talking to someone, Puck from Alpha Flight, and in this world, I guess he's just an evil guy who robs people and kills people, but it was close to the end of that scene before I realized that it was Puck because of the way the characters were drawn on the page. Not the way he draws the characters, but like Puck was kind of off in the background of a panel for most of that scene, and it wasn't until the very end of that scene that I realized that that was Puck. And then there's one scene near the end of this book where the Sinister Six is attacking the X-Men, and up until near the end of that scene, I was only counting 5 characters. There's a big panel reveal where we're supposed to see the entire team except for one of them, but I'm only seeing like 3 or 4 of the characters who are on this team of 6. And then one character is saying, well, here's the 5 that are over here, and I went and I counted each of them, and they were not 5 of them. There was only 4. There's a lot of that going on here where I get the feeling that Chris Bachalo, he's not doing it right. He needs to do it where, and I like his style. I like the way the characters are drawn, but I think placement of characters within a panel needs a lot of work within this story. And that's a weird place to start with this review, but since I'm usually more of a story guy, I've said this before, recently in fact, since I'm usually more of a story guy, I wanted to go ahead and talk about the art right now. And I do like Chris Bachalo's art. It's just that in this particular story, I think he could have used a little work. He could have maybe had some second thoughts, maybe did another draft of some of these pages that he did. That's only a thing on like a few of the pages, but for the most part, I thought that his art was good. It's just that the way he did it could have used some work. This is a 6-issue miniseries, but there's a one-shot that collects several short stories that's in here. Like there's one that shows what was going on with Colossus before the Generation Next team was founded. And it's stuff like that, like it shows Wolverine meeting Mariko. There was one that was, what's his name? I can't remember now. There were a few short stories in there. And then it gets to the actual story, which is 1 year after the Age of Apocalypse event was over. My big problem with this book, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of The Dark Knight Strikes Again. The Dark Knight Strikes Again is a fine story if you pretend like it is not a sequel to The Dark Knight Returns. That is my thoughts on that, and that is my thoughts on this. This would have been much better if it was not a sequel to The Age of Apocalypse. If they just said, this is a brand new alternate reality where the X-Men are slightly different, it would have been fine. But the problem is, this does not feel like The Age of Apocalypse. Now, I understand in the world of the Age of Apocalypse, Apocalypse was defeated. So in theory, that is an opportunity for the good guys to have a victory, to win, and to kind of make the world a better place. And that's kind of where this book goes. But the problem that I have here is that I don't think the Age of Apocalypse is a place where the good guys should have victories. I think this is a world that needs to always be Escape from New Yorkie. It needs to always be a crappy world where the good guys are always the underdogs. If Apocalypse has been defeated, then some other huge crisis needs to happen that the X-Men are always fighting against. I don't think that the Age of Apocalypse is a world where luxuries can happen and the good guys can have a victory and just take a rest and not have to worry about fighting the good fight. You can do that kind of thing in other alternate realities. Heck, you can do that kind of thing in the mainstream Marvel universe. But for the Age of Apocalypse, I don't really think that that's something that you should do. And that's something this story does. We move forward 1 year after the main Age of Apocalypse stuff, and they've already got a president of the United States. The X-Men are living large. They are kind of advisors to the president. They're helping him hunt down people who helped Apocalypse during the Age of Apocalypse. And that's one thing that I thought was interesting. You may have seen a World War II movie or a post-World War II movie where people are hunting down Nazis who were heavily involved with the Nazi regime during World War II, and they're kind of hunting those people down after the war. That's kind of going on here, basically, where the people who helped Apocalypse, they are kind of hiding out and the X-Men are hunting them all down. I thought that was an interesting idea, but ultimately that seems to be the main push of the story. There's really two things that are pushing this story. One, it's that the X-Men are hunting down these people, and that's just kind of there to kill some time until we get to the other big thing in this story, which is that the Age of Apocalypse was supposed to have been destroyed after the Age of Apocalypse was over. Bishop went back to the past and he prevented the big thing that caused the Age of Apocalypse. And in theory, that means that that timeline no longer exists. And all of the X-Men in the Age of Apocalypse were under the impression that that was going to happen. Well, at one point, we are seeing as the world almost ends, and then it's like, but it doesn't. And as it turns out, Jean Grey, for some reason, has the Phoenix Force. I don't understand why, because in the Marvel 616 universe, she got the Phoenix Force because she was in outer space. In the world of the Age of Apocalypse, Jean Grey was never in outer space. She just has the Phoenix Force for some reason. And that's another thing. I almost get the feeling that the guy who wrote this, I don't know his name, it's Akira Yoshida, actually. I almost get the feeling that he is not quite familiar enough with the X-Men or with the Age of Apocalypse itself to be writing something like this. I really think they should have gotten someone who is a little more familiar with the original Age of Apocalypse and also X-Men history in general, because Jean Grey, the only reason that she would have the Phoenix Force in any timeline is if she went up into outer space with the rest of the X-Men during that whole Starcore shuttle incident that happened in Chris Claremont's X-Men run. And if she didn't go into outer space, then there's no reason that she would have the Phoenix Force, at least in my humble opinion. But here, apparently, she just had it this whole time, and it kind of manifested itself to stop all of the nuclear bombs from destroying the world, and I guess somehow that prevents the entire timeline itself from being obliterated by Bishop going back in time. I don't really know how, but it does. So then, the X-Men, they are under the impression that Magneto saved the world, and that Jean Grey is dead. It turns out Jean Grey is not dead. The X-Men, they bury her, and then Sinister, he goes and resurrects her, or I guess she was never dead, so he just unburies her, and he's doing experiments on her, turns her into one of his Sinister Six. Now, this was another thing. Sinister died in the original Age of Apocalypse. Once again, I don't think that Akira Yoshida really knew what he was doing. Now, at the very end of this story, Magneto even says, "We had heard rumors that you were dead." So clearly, Akira Yoshida knew what he was talking about. He was aware that Sinister had died in the original Age of Apocalypse. But we are never told how he survived. We are never told why he is doing what he is doing. Here, he tells Magneto, he says that he wants to work with Magneto. He wants to take over the world using the Phoenix Force, which can help him do that. And Magneto's like, no, I'm not going to help you. What makes you think I would do something like that? And Sinister is like, fine then, I am going to have to destroy you. And that's basically his motivation. We don't really know why Sinister is doing what he's doing, other than he's just a bad guy. But one of the things that I liked about Sinister in the original Age of Apocalypse is that yes, he was one of the Four Horsemen, but he was actually a traitor to Apocalypse. He was planning on betraying Apocalypse. He was providing the Human High Council with information to help them defeat Apocalypse. And not only that, but in the Marvel 616 timeline, Sinister is just a cold, ruthless scientist, but in the Age of Apocalypse, he was a father figure to Cyclops and Havoc. And I like that he was not as bad as he was in the Marvel 616 world. But here he's just a crazy dude who just wants to kill Magneto for no real reason at all. Basically, everything that Sinister does in this story makes no kind of sense at all. He goes and approaches Magneto, who at the time was under the impression that Sinister was dead. And he says, hey, listen, I'm not dead, but I want you to try and distract the X-Men and the President and everyone from my trail. If they get too close to me, I want you to take them somewhere else, because I know that you did not save the world. So Mr. Sinister is kind of blackmailing Magneto, but Magneto even mentions, listen, I thought you were dead. Why would you come to me and reveal that you are still alive if I thought you were dead? That's never answered here. It's just a stupid thing that happens in this story. Basically, this whole book is a collection of pretty dumb things. I know I said this would have been a fine story if it was not a sequel to the Age of Apocalypse, and in many ways it would have been, because, like I said, if this was just its own timeline, Mr. Sinister acting totally different than he did in the Age of Apocalypse would not be an issue. If this was its own timeline, we would not have to worry about this world feeling so completely different from the Age of Apocalypse that we got. If it was up to me, talking about how this world feels so totally different, I would have rather, after Apocalypse is destroyed, I would have rather the entire world kind of be up for grabs, and Apocalypse's Four Horsemen, or I guess the three surviving horsemen, they are kind of trying to take over the world, and they're all warring with each other. So instead of this world looking peachy clean and looking just basically good as new, and the X-Men are heroes and all of that, kind of like they are in the 616 timeline, instead of that happening, this should have been more of what we got in the Age of Apocalypse. But instead of Apocalypse being the big bad, it would have been his three surviving horsemen who were kind of the big bad. I think that should have been the direction that they went. Unfortunately, they chose not to do that. We have some other stuff here, some new characters who, as far as I know, were not part of the original Age of Apocalypse. Psylocke, I don't remember if she was in the original Age of Apocalypse. I don't think she was. She shows up here just out of nowhere. I don't know how she's related to the X-Men. I don't know how they know her, but she's here, she shows up, and she saves their butts. Silver Samurai, he's another one. I don't think he was in the original stuff. And then we have this world's version of X-23, but instead of being a clone of Wolverine, she's actually Wolverine's daughter. And at one point we see a flashback where she's in this, not test tube, but kind of a big test tube thing, and it's labeled X-23. I don't know why it's labeled X-23, because she is not the 23rd clone of Wolverine like she is in the Marvel 616 timeline, so there's really no reason for her to be called X-23 in this world. These characters are okay. I can take them or leave them. Psylocke, for one, she doesn't get anything to do. She just shows up near the end and kills somebody, and that's that. She doesn't really have anything to do in this story. Silver Samurai, him and Wolverine hate each other. I don't know why. I think it's because Wolverine deflowered Mariko back in the past, but really their hatred/rivalry is kind of stupid. At times it's extremely stupid that these two are preparing to fight. Like at one point, Silver Samurai is playing football with the rest of the X-Men. Again, that's one of those things you would expect to happen in the Marvel 616 timeline, but in the Age of Apocalypse world, that is not something that I want to see. I don't want to see these guys playing football. I want to see these guys going to war against the forces of evil, which are outnumbering them. But here, we see Silver Samurai playing football with the rest of the X-Men, and then Wolverine comes and he's like, I'm going to stab that guy with a sword. Why? He's one of your allies. You need his help to fight the bad guys. I understand that these characters are not going to be friends with each other, and that's fine, but they really need to stop acting like 4-year-olds and actually work together so that they can fight the bad guys. Then we have some other stuff that's really strange. In this world, the character of Beak, he exists apparently. He was one of the either the Dark Beast or Mr. Sinister's experiments. But here's the really strange thing. In the world of the Marvel 616 world, it's understandable why Beak is called Beak, because he looks like a walking chicken. He has a beak. In this world, he looks more like Toad. He does not have a beak. Why, I ask you, why is this character called Beak if he doesn't have a beak? This is another one of those things where I am almost certain that Chris Bachalo just drew some stuff happening for 6 issues, and then Akira Yoshida had to write a story that fit around these pictures. And somewhere along the way, someone forgot to mention that Beak is supposed to have a beak. That's just one of those dumb things. I mentioned in my review of Batman Imposters some really minor stuff that really got under my skin when it really shouldn't have. This is one of those things. The character of Beak, call me crazy, he should have a beak. Right, guys? Am I right? Am I the only one who thinks this? And then you also have a character, Zorn. Now, in the original Marvel 616 timeline, Zorn would be an entire video in and of himself, and I'm not going to explain Zorn, but long story short, Zorn was a traitor to the X-Men. In this story, Zorn is a female with long hair. It's a girl wearing the Zorn mask, okay? I don't know where the Zorn mask came from. I don't know where this character got the name Zorn. But in this story, just like in the original Marvel 616 timeline, Zorn is also a traitor. Here's what I don't understand. It's a spoiler, by the way, a big spoiler. I'm going to put my thumb up, and as long as my thumb is up, then I'm spoiling stuff. Zorn is Paige Guthrie, okay? Thumb is going down, spoilers are over. I don't understand where that character got the name Zorn. I guess I don't understand where the character got the name Zorn in the Marvel 616 timeline. I just assumed that in that timeline he just made it up. But am I to understand that in 2 completely different timelines, 2 completely different characters, both just grabbed from the ether this name of Zorn? They both just made it up out of thin air, and they both made up the exact same name. That is extremely silly to me. As far as who the character of Zorn is, I actually kind of like that. In the original Age of Apocalypse stuff, that character was a good guy. She was one of the characters who, spoiler, in the Generation Next stuff, I guess I should put this up, in the Generation Next stuff, she was left for dead by Colossus. I thought it was really interesting that here she's basically really upset that she was left for dead and that nobody came and tried to rescue her. I thought that made a lot of sense. I don't entirely understand why she's wearing the Zorn mask or why she grabbed the name Zorn out of nowhere. I thought that was kind of stupid. Also, at one point, we have a really dumb scene where the X-Men are trying to invite the Morlocks to come and live with them on the surface world. I didn't even know the Morlocks existed in this world. I thought that if there were mutants living under the sewers, then the Dark Beast or Mr. Sinister would have been killing them or experimenting on them or something. In this world, the Morlocks live under the sewers just like they do in the 616 timeline, when that doesn't really make any sense at all, and the X-Men are trying to say, hey, you guys should come up to the surface. And for no real reason, the X-Men and the Morlocks, they have to fight each other. I don't know why, but at one point, one of the Morlocks, they scratch Zorn, and then Zorn has to be taken to the medical center up at the mansion, and then we see that the doctor has treated Zorn, and then Zorn's 2 friends are Wolfsbane and Beak. And then when they leave, we see Zorn, she kind of pulls up her shirt, and we see something on her skin. Well, whenever we find out who Zorn is, it makes sense what that was on her skin, because, spoiler again, Paige Guthrie's power is to tear her skin off, and then she can be, like, made of metal or made out of acid or something like that. She's kind of sort of a shapeshifter, but with a twist on her powers, so it makes sense what was on Zorn's skin. Here's my question. The Doctor clearly knows what Zorn's powers are. Why isn't the Doctor mentioning just casually, yeah, it's a good thing that Zorn's power is to tear her skin off and be safe whenever someone scratches her like that? And then Storm or Nightcrawler or Magneto can be, whoa, 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 did you say tears her skin off? That sounds an awful lot like Paige Guthrie. And it turns out it is Paige Guthrie. This is another one of those things. It's a really small thing, but at the same time, it's extremely stupid. Why on earth would the Doctor not mention that? And don't say it's patient confidentiality with the Doctor, because, yes, being injured or having cancer or you're pregnant, that stuff falls under patient-doctor confidentiality, but her powers, that should not be patient-doctor confidentiality. That should be just common knowledge among the X-Men. And if her power is to rip her own skin off and be something different underneath, the X-Men should know about that, and they should obviously know that that's Paige Guthrie. But because this story wants to treat that as a spoiler and as a reveal, they're not going to have characters doing stuff that actually makes sense. Ultimately, do I recommend this story to anyone? if you have never read the original Age of Apocalypse, then yes, you are going to enjoy this. You're going to really like it, unless you just don't like Chris Bachalo's artwork. If you have read the original Age of Apocalypse, I'm going to say skip this. It's not worth getting. This is basically the most skippable Age of Apocalypse thing I have ever seen. Maybe that's not true. There was a very brief period of time around the same, in fact, the year that this came out, this was the 10th anniversary of the Age of Apocalypse. This same year, in the Exiles comic book, the Exiles briefly visited the Age of Apocalypse, and in fact, they mention that at the end of this book. Magneto mentions that he saw some of the characters who were in the Exiles. That's probably the most skippable one, that issue of Exiles. But this is a very close second. This is something, if you are interested in that world, honestly, I would say just go read the original stuff, because what I've read from Uncanny X-Force, it doesn't get a whole lot better. It gets a little better than this, but in a lot of ways, it's just really inconsistent. If you try to read the original Age of Apocalypse, and then you try and read this, and you try and read that Exile storyline, and then you try and read Uncanny X-Force, it's all just really inconsistent with itself. But this is definitely, I don't think anyone has to read this, but if you've never read the Age of Apocalypse, if for some reason you are against buying those big four paperback books, the Epic collections, if you don't want to get those, you could buy this and you could read this, and you would probably enjoy it. It's not as good as the original stuff, though. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. That's about all I have to say here. I think I hated this book more after doing this video than when I was reading it, and I didn't even enjoy it that much when I was reading it, so I think that says quite a bit. That's all I have to say here, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope I was able to help you one way or another decide if you wanted to give this book a shot. If I was able to help you, I hope you will like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back later in the week to do some other kind of video, so I will see you guys then. Have a great day.